In 2016, the concept of slavery is a hard idea for many of us to imagine, but it is something real that unfortunately did indeed exist, both in Russia and the United States of America. In Russia, serfdom was very similar to the type of slavery that existed in America. In this video, I will take a look at serfdom in Russia and slavery in America, comparing and contrasting them along the way. Serfdom in Russia can be traced all the way back to the 11th century, but total subjugation did not become widespread until around 1550. A serf was an unfree peasant. Peasants were poor, low-class farmers who lived and farmed on noblemen's land. It was because a person lived on a nobleman's land that he was a serf and bound to the landowner. It was the most dominant form of relationship between wealthy people and peasants in the central and southern parts of Russia. There is one thing that, at least in theory, distinguished serfdom in Russia from slavery in America. Serfs were still people. Slaves in America, however, were always viewed as the disposable property of their slave masters. Landowners did not own their serfs, although this difference became hard to see as serfdom subjugation increased. Around 1550, Russian serfdom became much more oppressive than it had previously been. Before 1550, serfs had the ability to move freely and leave their landowners' plots during the weeks of Yuri's Day. Yuri's Day was a day of special importance for Russian peasants and farmers. It marked the celebratory period when the harvest was finally in. The weeks before and after Yuri's Day were a time when serfs could move from one landowner to another freely. However, during the administration of Boris Godunov, serfs were no longer allowed to celebrate Yuri's Day or move freely between landowners. This marked the beginning of complete subjugation of serfs by landowners and other noblemen. In 1658, fleeing from a landowner became a criminal offense. Landowners were able to transfer serfs to other landowners while keeping their serfs' personal belongings. Essentially, landowners had total control and were able to do almost whatever they wanted to do to their serfs. The only thing they could not do was kill them. By the 1800s, serfdom in Russia was so widespread that 80% of Russian peasants were serfs, and 30% of the entire Russian population found themselves under the control of Russian noblemen and landowners. Serfdom in Russia subsequently became the source of many problems. It caused multiple things like military incompetence, food shortages, overpopulation, civil disorder, and industrial backwardness. Like in America, there were small rebellions and much talk about whether to end the wretched practice of subjugation, but attempts to end serfdom in Russia were never really successful. It was not until 1861 that serfdom was officially abolished. Alexander II freed all serfs in the Emancipation Manifesto of 1861. His decision to do so was in part because of his view that it was better to free the peasants from above as opposed to waiting until their uprisings from below. In other words, he believed the liberation of the serfs should flow from the top down instead of the other way around. Because of Alexander II's reform, over 23 million serfs were freed and subsequently allowed to own property, marry without the consent of their landowners, trade freely, own businesses, sue in courts, and vote in local elections. While these things were benefits, the emancipation did not guarantee that life for the former serfs would be completely easy. There were still rules and regulations in place that prevented the serfs from experiencing total and complete life, liberty, and happiness. Likewise, Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, while it formally attempted to end slavery, did not guarantee the freedom of many U.S. slaves. Slaves still faced discrimination and other setbacks. It wasn't until the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that U.S. former slaves began to reap the true benefits of freedom. While many might believe that the United States of America and Russia are two very drastically different countries, when comparing serfdom in Russia to slavery in America, it is quite easy to see that there is indeed something that makes these two nations similar.